Good morning, I'm David Williams, bakery lecturer at Truro and Penwith College. I'm also attached to the hospitality table for Cornwall. Today we're going to do a short demonstration on Danish pastries and croissants. So we're going to laminate some dough and show you the process of lamination. Danish pastries and croissants, virtually the same dough. We've got a couple of recipes here that we can follow. But what we need to remember is that it's an enriched, laminated, fermented dough. Enriched means it contains more dairy products, so milk, eggs or butter. Laminated means we form layers like puff pastry, and fermented means it's got yeast in it. I've already weighed my ingredients into this bowl, all except the yeast. We're using fresh yeast today. If you're using dried yeast, you would use half the amount of fresh yeast, because by the time it takes the water and swells, it will come back to reconstitute to being fresh yeast, fresh or compressed. For yeast to be in good condition, and it can be frozen, it needs to break with a clean fracture, be creamy brown in colour, and the books will tell you it should have the smell of fresh apples. Personally, I've never smelt an apple that smells like yeast. You should never put yeast in direct contact with salt. And I'm about to show you why. It's just a little bit of salt there. Salt is an acid. Got some compressed yeast there, which is live and an alkali. Put them in direct contact. And it really doesn't like it. What's happening is the salt is breaking down the cell wall of the yeast. It's a little bit like putting salt on a slug, but not quite so nasty. So you can see now that the yeast is breaking down. The salt's broke down the cell wall, and the yeast is now dead. It's quite a brutal demonstration, but it shows the importance of salt in a dough. It doesn't just give flavour and affect the crumb structure, but it also affects the performance of the yeast. So weighing and measuring, as usual, very, very important. So I'll bury the salt in the flour, put in the fresh yeast that's pre-weighed. I'm now going to mix it on the machine for 2 minutes on speed 1, 5 minutes on speed 2. This will develop the gluten in the bread flour, because we need a strong structure to form a skeleton which will catch the gas that the fat gives off when it melts. Okay, so we've mixed our dough in the machine. It's now nice and stretchy and elastic. We've developed the gluten in a way that this will now form the skeleton of the product that we're making. There are lots of ways of making puff pastry and laminating. They're named after the different ways of incorporating the fat that we're going to laminate with. Today we're going to put the fat in using the French method, which is my personal choice. So we need a little bit of flour on the table, but not too much. We've got our ball of dough, which I'm just going to cut across into about halfway through. So we now spread them out. And using a rolling pin, you'll notice that I'm not throwing flour everywhere. Dust inhalation is a really dangerous thing, and something that the Environmental Health Agency are really hot on these days. So we're just going to pin these out, trying to keep everything as square as possible. The idea being that this lump in the middle is 4 times as thick as these parts. We're trying to keep everything square. We roll it out into a cross. I don't know if the camera will pick up that that's quite a big lump in the middle. The fat that I'm using, obviously butter would be nice, but you've only got to look at butter and it starts to melt, and it takes all day to do a job like this. This is what we use in the trade. It's pastry margarine. It's basically margarine that's been treated with brine and add nitrogen passed through it to make it pliable. I've flattened it out so it fits in the middle of my dough, and I'm now folding over the bits that I've rolled out. Doesn't matter what order you do this in, and we just fold it over to make a parcel. So the four we folded over should be the same thickness now as the lump of dough we had underneath. To start the lamination process, we're just going to flatten it out a little bit, just to give us a head start with our rolling. We're going to give this 3 half turns. For people who aren't familiar with the terminology, a half turn is when you're folding the pastry into 3. And when you do that, you turn 90 degrees and go the other way. This is opposed to a book turn, which, as the name suggests, you fold it into the center like a book and it folds in that way. Hopefully it'll be clear when I do it. Again, we need a little bit of flour underneath the pastry or it'll stick to the table and not slide. We don't really need any on the top, and we don't need to flour our pin. If we've made our dough correctly, we shouldn't need it. Any extra flour we put in now is going to be incorporated into the dough and it's going to toughen our product. So we'll just start to roll this out now. Do about 3 times its original size, trying to keep the corners out and keeping it square. I don't think there's such a word as squarity, but I like to think that we preserve the squarity. That rolls out quite easily. We're going to give it our first half turn. Okay, so we've now got 3 layers. I'll turn it 90 degrees. Again, just a little dust of flour underneath. And we're off for the second turn. Same as before, keep it moving, keep the corners square. We don't want to get any waste out of this. Try to move the dough and not the pin. A rolling pin should go forwards and backwards. If you start rolling it that way, you never get even pressure on both ends. Second turn, same as the first. Again, keeping our corners nice and square, and turn 90 degrees. So that's the second turn, that's another 3, so 3 threes, it's now got 9 layers. The further we go on with this, the more difficult it becomes, because the gluten, being like an elastic substance, is trying to shrink the pastry back to its original shape. So after this one, we'll just let it have a little rest. Okay, we're in for our third and final turn. So that's our third turn, 3 threes are 9, 3 nines 27, 3 27s are 81 I think. So we've now got 81 layers of fat, and we're just going to let that rest for a couple of minutes to recover. This pastry now, this laminated dough has had a little bit of a rest. I'm now going to pin it out and do some simple Danish pastries with it. So we're just rolling out to about 4 millimeters thick. And again, you can see we're trying to keep the corners square. We don't want to trim stuff down because it's just going to be thrown in the bin, and that's just wastage. And I'll never be a rich man if I keep doing that. Okay, the Danish pastries we're going to make today are almond and sultana. So what I've done is run down a few ground almonds with some egg white and sugar into a paste that I can easily spread. Anyone who's made Congress tarts, it's pretty much the same mixture. So with my scraper now, I'm just going to spread it all over, making sure you come right up to the edge, or some unlucky person will have the end one and there'll be no almond in it. But we can put a reasonable amount in, but don't be too greedy because it will bubble out in the oven. It'll make your product look ugly, and again it'll be wastage, which nobody wants. Right, so I've got quite a generous spread, but not too much all over the dough. What I have done is left around about 2 centimetres at the bottom without any filling on, and I'm just going to moisten that, not too wet, and that'll help it stick when I roll it up. The next job is to put some sultanas on. Nice and evenly spread, and again making sure you get up to the very end. Don't want to leave any on the table or throw them on the floor. Right. Now it's the fun part, we're going to try and roll it up. So over your first turn, just a little bit. You don't want to roll it too tight because the centres will lift. Again, keeping your ends nice and square. There we are. We should now have a tube all coiled up nicely, the same thickness all the way through, so our Danish are the same size. Now I'm looking, I think the recipe for this says 12, so we want to get 12 even ones, so I'll mark it in half, then in half again. So that's now marked into 4. Yeah, that's looking quite big. I'm going to cheat a little bit and get 16 out of this. So I'll mark them in half again. So I've now got 8 sections, and now I'll cut them down. Use all the blade of the knife. We should be able to see up close. If we can get in on that, Fiona, we can see the lamination that we've made, the layers of fat. I hope that shows up on the camera okay. Getting them all the same size is important because it will affect the baking. If they're all going on the same tray, you don't want one baking in 15 minutes and another one baking in 20. So we try to get them all the same size so we get an even bake. So when we're traying up, the end pieces are always a little bit ugly, so make sure that that side goes down. And remember that they're going to expand. Again, apart from my obsession with straight lines, you'll get a much more even bake if things are spread evenly. Okay, that's our 16 Danish pastries. They're now going into the prover because the yeast will then kick in to make them expand. Not fully, because when they go in the oven, the puff pastry element of the recipe will make them puff out again. Hopefully we'll see that when they come out of the oven. When you're proving Danish pastries, set your prover a little bit cooler than you would for bread, because if the prover's too hot, it will melt the fat in the lamination, which will run out, and then you'll get a poor product. Okay, we'll put them in the prover now, hopefully for about 30 minutes. We're now going to make this batch of pastry into some croissants. I've had a request for almond croissants today, so we're going to do them in a couple of different ways. So again, we're rolling out our pastry. Been meaning for a lot of years to make a template for these, but I've never done it. Again, you'll notice that there's no extra flour going on the pastry, it's a little bit underneath to help it slide. Here we are, we pinned the pastry out, same thickness all the way through. I'm going to split it down the middle. Let's get a smaller knife. This time we'll just stretch the corners out a little bit, and that will make me get a better triangle. So we're now going to cut it into an equilateral triangle. Same with the bottom one. You've now got nice even triangles. Got a little bit of almond paste left over from my Danish, which I'm going to use up. This is still quite runny, so I'm going to thinly spread this over the triangles. And I'll explain as I'm rolling them up why I'm doing this. We're going to put a big blob of almond in the middle, but you'll find at the ends of the croissant you don't really get the almond in. So by doing it this way, we should get some almond in the very ends, and our customers won't be disappointed. So quite a thin coating on the dough. So I've now got a big blob of the almond mix. If you're wondering where you could get this, you could probably just get some marzipan and soften it down with some water. It'll be fine. You just need it a little bit soft, so we can run it along. Just flour my fingers a little. And put some almond along the wide part of the croissant. It's a little bit boring watching me do a lot of them, so I imagine this will be cut a little bit. So our croissant dough is laid out with a thin film of almond paste over it, and also a little strip of the thicker stuff. All we want to do now is fold it over and roll them up. I try to just bring my hands out a little bit to make them longer. Bend them around and give them a squeeze to form that classic crescent shape. Make sure that your tail is tucked underneath because you don't want them flipping over in the oven. So we'll roll a couple more. Now, a lot of people think croissants are French. They're actually Austrian. They're viennoiserie rather than patisserie. There's a lot of stories about them, but allegedly in about 1680 the Turks with the Ottoman Empire were trying to invade Austria. Some bakers heard them tunnelling and reported it, allegedly saved Austria, and as a reward for the bakers they invented this bun, which is based on the traditional Austrian delicacy called kipferl. And the reason they're rolled like this is to mimic the crescent on the Turkish or Islamic flag. I'd normally put these straight on the tray to reduce handling time, but what we're going to do with some of these, if you're making some plain croissants and some almond, a lot of people don't like almond, and of course a lot of people have got nut allergies, which is something we have to be aware of. We do some without any almond in them, and you need to make it obvious which ones have got the almond in. So what we're going to do is just give them a light spray of water. We've got a few semi-toasted almonds, and we'll just dip the croissant in so it's slightly decorated. I'll only do a few of these because, again, some people don't really like too many almonds. Some people would spray these on the tray and then sprinkle the almonds on, but in my opinion that just makes the tray dirty, and I'm bone idle, I wouldn't want to clean it up afterwards. The rest on plain. Okay, so there's our nice almond croissant. We could egg wash them, or we could not. So we're going to put these in the prover now, prove them at around about 28 degrees. Again, because we don't want to melt the fat in the lamination, and hopefully they'll come out quite nice. Well, we've come over to the prover cabinet. Hopefully the Danish and the croissants have doubled in size and they're ready for the oven. Proving cabinet is around about 29 degrees today, so the fat hasn't run out. There's our Danish. Now you can really see the lamination. Fantastic. Whoever made these really knew what they were doing. Okay, we'll just pop them in the oven. That's on about 125 degrees. To be honest, they usually spring apart. Okay, in they go. Okay, so we're now going to finish our Danish. What I've done is boiled up some apricot jam. We like to use apricot jam for glazing because apricots contain more pectin than most fruit and the jam is set a lot better. It also dries almost see-through and looks far more attractive than if we use red jam. So blue brush always should be blue, and we just liberally paint over the Danish, making sure we don't splash ourselves because there's nothing worse than a jam burn. First thing you do with a jam burn, if you get hot jam on your fingers, put it in your mouth, and then you end up burning your tongue and your lip. No, be very careful with boiling jam. I like to do this on the tray because you invariably make a bit of a mess, and when we're finished we can just throw this paper away. Okay, so we should have now a nice glaze. Don't leave your brush in the saucepan because you invariably put it back on the heat and melt the bristles. The next thing we're going to do, I've made up a little bit of water icing, cheap and easy, just icing, sugar and water. You can put a little bit of lemon juice in it, but for today's practice we haven't. We're going to cut a very small hole in the bag. You can always make it bigger, but it's almost impossible to make it small. A little bit of a test. Yes, that's just right. We're now going to spin this over the Danish to make him a nice finish and get a little bit of rhythm and try not to stop. Nice long strokes and diagonal. For some reason, if you put it up and down, it just doesn't look as nice. Lots of traditional finishes on Danish. From a commercial point of view, I find this the cheapest and quickest. There we are, 18 Danish decorated with water icing. We'll finish them off with half a glacé cherry. Just stick him in the middle. When you cut your cherries, try to cut right through the hole so you've got a nice smooth finish on it. And we're just going to finish it off today. Got hold of some Angelica, which is a plant product, purely for decoration. Hasn't really got much of a taste, but it just adds a nice effect. Commercially, you probably wouldn't do this because it takes too long. And there we have quite a cheap, but very effective little decoration on our Danish. Okay. Croissants coming out of the oven, as you can see. And they've kept their shape, which I'm quite pleased about.